back together a place of having a healthier relationship of the story with forgiveness and with grace and with a greater perspective and a greater empathy and a greater relationship with the woman in the mirror, then I'm hurting the person that he loved. And one of the last things he asked me to do was to take care of the person he loved so much more than he could.
That's the truth, right? I'm sure we'll talk about this when we talk about grieving and some other things down the road, but that is the last thing that he would have wanted for you, right?
He genuinely, whether I agree with his choice or not, he genuinely felt he was unburdening our relationship along with himself.
That's an interesting perspective because
it was wrong and I disagree with it.
Yeah. I could place Tim in that same thing. Like, I'm unburdening partner's family. In this episode of the Life in Boxes podcast, we're going to be tackling a subject matter that is just not comfortable for people to talk about. When Jenni and I first met at a networking event for the startup community, our connection was about how can this person help me with what I'm up to, right? I'm sure that was how we both looked at it. Within 15 minutes, we were sharing our personal losses to suicide with each other. It was great. Not like, woohoo, hey, we're talking about suicide, but great that this was an open, honest conversation that felt normal. This is an uncomfortable conversation for most. They don't know what to say, think, or feel in these situations. When we set out to start this podcast, our primary goal was to normalize these kinds of conversations and have people know that they are not alone in what they are dealing with. This topic in particular, men's suicide, was that inspiration. So truly, from the bottom of our hearts, know that you are not alone. And we hope that if suicide is something that has touched your life, that you feel more freedom around having these conversations and less alone. Welcome to Life in Boxes, the podcast.
Ooh, it's a good opener.
With Jenni Lou.
That's me.
That's her.
And Gary too.
Gary Malcolm, not Gary too. Awesome. Well, shall we jump into it?
Yeah.
Are you ready?
We've got a dog pile to my left, in case anybody was wondering.
Yep. They'll probably visit at some point. They tend
I feel
to.
like they should actually become like the regulars.
They're regulars. They're going to be regulars. All right. You want to pull out that first card?
It's a light one.
It's a
light one today. Today we're talking about, can't probably read that.
Yeah.
Men's suicide.
Something we've both experienced. Been a big part of our conversations from the first day that we met.
It was a real icebreaker.
Yeah, real icebreaker. But also, those are the kind of conversations that get us here.
Yeah.
Yeah, in doing this. So, just to share, right? Like, I'll start with just sharing that I lost two previous brother-in-laws, right? So people that were very close, the uncle to my girls, and a year apart, they both committed suicide. You know, the first one was extremely tragic. You know, we knew that he was dealing with stuff, but we didn't have any idea that it was ever at that depth. And with the second one, we knew that from time to time he had been dealing with things, but it definitely came out of it, I think, for a lot of us. What there's to share about Tim is very successful in many ways. Like, it wasn't about having the nice place, money, all of those things. Like, maybe those stresses played into it, but it just, for me, it resonates that, like, yeah, just goes to show you, right? Like, all of the things isn't necessarily what's going to make or break being happy or being in that space. And, you know, I'm sure we'll talk more about that, those sorts of things. But yeah, so two very close men in my life that took their lives. How about you?
The man in my life took his life. Yeah. I also want to acknowledge, just because, for what it's worth, we've attempted to have this conversation before. Mm-hmm. We already have recorded it was almost 2 hours worth of a conversation about this. And it is such a difficult, not just story, but topic to unpack. And not in the interest of perfection, but in the interest of our relationship to our stories and the relationship to those that we love that we've lost, it does matter to us to unpack the pieces in a way that honors the love that we have for these people, but also the message that we want to convey. And so this is actually our second attempt to do that, and I think that the reattempt matters.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just appreciate that you're in that boat with me. It is feels like one of the most impossible things to do, to succinctly talk through these things without wanting to just make sure people can understand every single detail. And then when you zoom out and realize that actually you can zoom way out to some consistent themes, and one of them is that people don't feel safe to talk about things that are dark and scary.
Yep.
Um, and it is not lost on me that you've had two very close men in your life die by suicide, because men die at a rate 5 times higher than women by suicide. Did I just jump the gun?
You jumped the gun.
Okay, well, so apparently there's a right way to do this, and we'll figure it out. So it sounds like we're gonna reach in for more cards, but to kind of like just give a little context here in terms of like, we're probably not going to get everything to the point where we feel like it's right, even within this conversation.
Yeah.
Because there isn't going to be a target that feels good. But I do think that I just want to acknowledge that we've really tried to put some care into honoring the legacy of these men, but also the story, the message.
And maybe most importantly, again, we know we're not the only ones going through this, just by pure data, right?
Yeah.
Like, we just know that people are dealing with this. We know people are struggling with this on both ends of the spectrum, whether it's the person that's contemplating it or whether it's the people that are surviving it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And the struggle is hard to talk about.
Yep. And literally, we're here to have this conversation, and maybe it makes a difference.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
Is this where I reach in?
Yep.
Okay. Once again, suicide rate for men is in the US is, you put 4 times greater.
Yep.
I've seen 5 times, but greater than women.
17.7 versus 4.5%
of the population.
Yeah. Well, no, per 100,000.
Okay.
Yeah. It's just shocking the rate that happens at.
Yeah, and I will probably talk more about this, but I think like the genesis of why this topic matters so much to me, probably have some sort of reference to it on every single recording that we do.
Mm-hmm.
But again, one of those themes coming back to, if we could just talk more about those scary, uncomfortable things, our experiences, our trauma, or maybe it's not even trauma, but just the struggle. If we can all learn to make space for that, for ourselves, for the person in the mirror, I feel we can make space for that for others more easily, because when we're more kind to ourselves, we can be more empathetic toward others. And I think that if nothing else resonates, I hope that we're learning that it's okay to name our stuff, and name it knowing it's from a place of love and an intent of healing. Man, woman, or anything, like, as a human being, this matters.
Yep, it certainly does.
Okay.
All right.
Can I? May I?
Yep.
Great. As if I wouldn't have without permission. Okay. So the them.
So the them, right? And so we've got two ways to approach this. There's, why is it 4 times greater for men? Why is the disparity there? Why is that a thing? And yeah, so from your perspective, and then I'll just share my perspective in that. Would you want me to go first? You want to go first?
I mean, I have very strong thoughts on this.
Yeah, why don't you jump in first? I think that's
okay. This is, like, really, to be candid, it's something that feels pretty obvious to me. Like, the research is out there, the stories are out there, and of course, this is backed. However, I'm not an expert, but I also see evidence of it everywhere. Women are raised as young girls in communities where there's a natural, call it the feminine energy, to come together, turn toward each other, and talk through things and process things together and ideate, or, work through things. We're, from a very young age, given names for our feelings. And even if, however you were raised, whether it was a healthy household or not, what I do know is that it seems that adults in a young girl's life have a natural inclination to work through feelings with young girls, young children differently than the approach offered for young men. And I think that there's inherent chain and cycle there, right? It has, you can see it left and right. There's all sorts of studies and articles
Yep.
about like the bucket up, throw some dirt in it, be a man, blah 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 blah. Cryings for girls, like, and no matter how much we've advanced, even in our own generations, to see um, the attempt at changing this conversation, and definitely some real progress. I think that everywhere I turn, there's work to be done when it comes to the way that men interact with their own feelings, and sort of the expectation of what it means to have masculine energy within this framing of feelings and emotions. And so yeah, and for my part, like it's taken me, I operate often within a masculine energy, and it's taken me a long time to work on vulnerability. But even within my internalization of thoughts and feelings and things that I thought were scary places to go in the name of vulnerability, I would journal, I would write, and I had the words for them. And so I think it starts with something as simple as, how do you name the things that you're feeling and going through? And when you name them, what does that evoke? And then it's like, now what? And I
Yeah.
think there's also, again, a lot of intuition in the feminine energy for the now what do we do with this? Whereas in the masculine energy, it seems like it's a there's perception of a wall there, or like, okay, great, well, what do I do with it? I can't change it. I can't. There's an
Right.
attitude
Right.
about it and a block. Or there's an oh fuck moment, and a judgment of, geez, I think I'm really fucked up. Like something's wrong with me. And it's like if we could just stop compartmentalizing the the label, like creating a label to the extent that it becomes who you are,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and more of a, this is where you are, as well as the reason we conjured up this boxes thing
Yeah.
is because of this compartmentalization and this perception of, well, if I just box it up and I put it on a shelf,
Yep.
it won't bother me anymore. It's just part of, it's a reset button, but it's there. And that's how I avoid intermingling who I am and where I've been. And it piles up and it does sit there and it will manifest and it leaks out. And what you're left with is feeling lost. And then over time, of course, it becomes very painful to look at that mountain if you're going to start digging at it later.
Yeah. I'm having I'm having a realization in this moment. Do you have anything more you want to say about that before I?
I think
Yep.
that that's like that's just
That's
the
not part of
tip
it.
of the
Okay.
iceberg. Of course, I have more to say, but I think that
Yeah. Yeah.
that's where I want to, like, the most succinct way of just saying, like, you're holding it in, you're not naming it,
Yeah.
and it's gonna eat you alive.
Yeah. So I read so my answer on to why it's men, right? You may have noticed I am a guy.
For the
Yeah,
most
for the
part,
most part.
I,
Yeah,
I,
yeah.
I you know, I don't want to put labels on things, Gary, but I do
but
believe.
so I have a little bit more. So I have a little bit of kind of real world insight there, right, on the
Mhm.
guy piece.
As a man,
Yeah,
you
yeah, I
think you have
do.
an
I
idea?
I think I have an idea. I
Oh,
think I
yeah,
might
of
have an
course.
idea. But you nailed it. The so the first thing in prepping for this, reading a couple of articles, it, and just trying to find why is this, because I was
Hmm.
blown away by the data, right? The why is it that men are 4 to 5 times more likely to commit suicide than women? And there's some intangibles. I'm not quite sure if I'm saying that right, but the methods, men are more violent, and so they're more committed from a violence standpoint, and their methodology is more final. And there's some ways to look at that where women are maybe taking less violent methods, and so, but also maybe not less committed to like really wanting to follow through with that. That's all hypothetical.
Hmm.
Everybody kind of, because you can't ask, right? You can't ask the ones that have left us. But the one thing that really resonated with me when you were speaking, and also was pointed to in these articles, was the communication. It's literally that upbringing that you're talking about. That, hey, I'm a guy. I'm supposed to rub some dirt in that. I'm not supposed to cry. I'm not supposed to do all these things, right? And that was certainly present for me as I was growing up, right?
Hmm.
And it was very, very much that was the world I grew up in. I'm now a leadership and communication coach. I'm really committed to communication be a part of my leadership style. Like that is what goes out into the universe. And it's just dawning on me like how much why communication has been so important to me over the last 7, 8 years because I see the difference it makes. I see the difference it makes when I communicate with my wife in the middle of an upset where normally before I would have just said, see you later, I'm out. Like, I'm just going to run away from this. I'm not going to talk about this. I'm not going to deal with this.
Don't have energy for it.
I would hide things rather than tell them, right?
Yeah.
Yep, I spent money investing into this. I didn't tell you about it, yada, yada, right? Like, there are things that I did just to hold it all into myself and do my whole thing. And going back to Tim, I can't imagine what he felt because I think he had it coming from every direction, and it was he probably felt like it was a house of cards and he didn't know what to do or how to do it, and I don't think he had that outlet. I don't
Well,
and it's just and it's just wow.
yeah, I also like over time, we summarize things like, why didn't they ask for help? Why didn't they come talk to me? Or there's almost like this like passive aggressive like shame
Mm-hmm.
in someone's first response. If like just think of like the thing you went through and you're catching up with an old friend, and then sometimes you hear that like, why didn't you tell me?
Yeah.
There's like this like you didn't let me in to help fix it. But I think this notion of what does it sound like to ask for help, I think is a whole other topic, because it's not it's rarely, hey, I need your help.
Yeah.
Right. But that feels, it's like if we don't have the sentences, the words, the ways, like asking for help can sound like, hey, I could use your advice on something I'm dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
Like there are a million phrases, right?
Well, I want to get to if so. Um, we started with them, right?
Yeah.
The ones that we've lost. Let's stick with that because the
Yeah.
next one, not to put the card in, is going to be more about the us,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I want to, before we leave the them, it's such a tough. What is it, right? Like, I'm sure every one of them's different. Is it heartbreak? Some of them. Is it pressure?
Well, you're talking about what is the tipping point?
Yeah, what is the tipping point? What is making them do it?
So,
more women get diagnosed with depression than men.
but there's something to that, right?
Yeah.
Women are seeking
the diagnosis,
assistance.
Yeah.
Which is why they're diagnosed.
Yeah.
And even if you look at our military, right? Like you look at our military, there are how many initiatives are there for better resources, not just for veterans, but active. You talk to anyone who's spent time in the military or families of, and you learn very quickly it is problematic to have anything medically speaking on your record about mental health.
Oh yeah.
And so, and the majority of our military being men, right? Like, and so it's just, it feeds it just feeds it. It feeds the it's not okay programming.
Well, and what's more, being a man than being a soldier, right? And
well, and the pride in that, all of it. But I think like it robs men of their humanness. Yeah. And if you can't go around being acknowledged for what you're dealing with, not because you need the world to know something, but if you can't even look in the mirror and have that sense of, I know I'm able to go, these are my tools, this is my tool belt, because I know I acknowledge I'm going through something that I need help with. If you have to shut that off when you look in the mirror just to go show up for your job every day, you're not just being denied by the people you encounter what you're dealing with, you're denying yourself. Mm-hmm. And when you shut that switch off, I think that is why that becomes the programming that leads to that solution. The tipping point, however, is not I don't think, like when I was asked so regularly what happened, what people are asking for is what led up to this, as though it was some fucking switch.
Yeah.
And it's not.
Yeah. It's accumulation, yeah.
Right? And like I can't speak to a world where I am sure that there are plenty of cases and stories out there around like it was a switch, or it was a something occurred in a rage, and
I'm sure that
unintentional outcome.
Right. I'm sure that there's been some of those those, right? But that's not,
Yeah, but
that
I
can't be
don't
the
think
majority of
that's
it.
the story
Yeah.
of how our wires get just,
Crossed up.
yeah, well, and just like to what it takes for someone to make that decision, like, is unfathomable. And to your point, like you were talking a little bit about the methods and things like that. I don't think it's like it's probably like gonna raise some hairs to think about or even try to cover the topic of like, well, did you really want to? The level of commitment, does the
Hmm.
nature of it, did you just want to escape pain? Does that really matter when we're talking about what does it take for a person to decide that they want to exit their human?
Yeah. Is it, there's no way out? I don't see a way out. I don't see an end. I don't see there's like, that's it. Or is it, I'm miserable. I'm not happy. I don't want to live this life anymore. Living is not
I
fun.
think it's
Like
shame
what is
and
it?
guilt
Like
and
it's like,
pain and trauma
yeah.
and feeling anyone who can say, I don't matter to anyone enough to stay. It's because they're saying, I don't matter to me. And to deny yourself value to such a degree means that no one externally can convince you to feel otherwise.
Yeah.
Because you can't let it in if there's not even a glimpse inside of you that sees possibility.
Do we think it's reality to that, what we're talking about, because there are survivors that get to talk about where they're at, and then we can't know ultimately where people were at?
But survivors
But
represent survivors.
absolutely.
They represent
And,
the people who wanted, like, who decided to stay.
well, or they survived it,
Right.
right?
And
Like
then made a different
to choice, and
choice.
then made a different choice. Yes, good point. Is it simple? Is it like literally the answer is get people sharing, get people communicating? Is that like the first thing to have people do and make sure that that's happening?
I think we talk about the scary things regardless of how hard it
Yeah.
feels. Yeah. And talk about it with people that are safe, obviously.
Mm-hmm. Let me push back on that for a second. But what's safe versus unsafe? And what I mean by that is, I think that when we start, if we're not willing to share with the people that are close to us, right, in whether it's our family and our friends, and just like, and that's a bigger circle than like just your one person or just that, right? Like for most of us, it's a broader group of people, and I think that one of the one of the issues is that if that group or that person that we're willing to call it a safe place is so small, we're really, the opportunity or the way to avoid it becomes really easy,
It feels
right?
like
Because
isolation.
you're
Yeah.
right, because part of what they're going through has to be alone. Like there is no help for me. There, I'm alone. There is no way out. There is no whatever. And so, or the shame or the guilt, all of those things, right? But like being, like you let off with talking about vulnerability, right? Renee is one of our favorite people. Thank God she got put on this planet to make it such a calling. Oh, look.
Favorite manual. Get it? Shout out to Renee.
Yeah. When we're looking at that, it's, for me, I would be concerned about, don't make it too safe, right? Like don't, be willing to be vulnerable and trust the people around you, right? I'm not saying go out and talk about it on social media, but don't be afraid to tell multiple people, yeah, I'm struggling in this spot, or I need help in this area, because I think that it's, uh, more is better, not less.
Yeah, I mean, as an example, well, do we need to follow any other pattern?
We have one more card left, so
But are we sharing here?
yeah, share away.
Okay.
Share away.
I need to know the rules. Um, one of the things from the day I met Chris, he sort of like gave me the rundown of like, here's how I operate, right?
Yeah.
Again, also like we'll have to do a whole like conversation about the things we loved about our humans because it's hard to honor his legacy in just this topic when this is an incredible larger than life man, right? Like, but one of the things when we were first dating was, now I need you to understand, I live my life in silos, boxes, right? Like work is work. Between the two of us, we sat on multiple boards, and each of those boards had their own sort of overlap of people between professional and friends and networking and things like that. Work is work, hobbies are hobbies, friends are friends, fraternity brothers are fraternity brothers, family is family, um, Burning Man is Burning Man. Uh, but don't overlap these things because he had so carefully curated who he wanted to be known as and for in these circles, right?
Yep.
So it was silos, and he talked about it very proudly, and almost to the extent where he enjoyed it. It wasn't manipulation in the sense of like undermining people, but he really enjoyed getting to show up as who he wanted to be and be seen and known and sort of like write the script for how he was seen so much in these places. And he cared so much about his own integrity and didn't want to, he saw it as a bother. He didn't want to bother people with the explanation of how he could serve Wall Street, be in the financial industry, be so successful over here, and yet be so liberal in a very professional way or personal way, excuse me,
Yeah.
because he felt that it would do damage to those relationships that he'd worked so hard to invest in and curate and be respected in, and so he had these personas, and very few people got to see the melting pot of him, the all of it at once. And so you can only imagine if we were going through something that was hard. I really had worked to make sure that I could show up for the people who I let in, my inner circle, very, very much like all of me, right?
Yeah.
And sure, there's certain, a degree of like the professional environment I was in. We very much, it wasn't like my life was up, on a chalkboard for everyone to know about, but like I didn't work so hard to hide these certain aspects of things. And that created a point of tension between us, just because I would forget that I had to shut my mouth about just being me in these audiences. But so again, when something difficult happened, my toolkit always was, I've got plenty of people around me who understand who I am, and I don't have to give a backstory to things, because I could just, here's what I've got going on. Whereas he would, it's in here, we're closing it.
That's it.
It's between us,
right?
Just us, and that was always very scary to me, because that meant it was like, who is influencing you? Who do you turn to when you need your own vent?
Yeah.
That even if it's about your wife or your family, or who do you go to for advice in this stuff? And whether it's a therapist or his friends or whatever, like he had such a great, strong community of capable people to turn to, that he chose to not, because it was none of your business.
Mm-hmm.
And also, this is our business, and it would be a bother to them, and also could potentially make it look bad. He was worried about
bad.
He was worried, like, I can't talk down about, it's not talking down about your wife. I was like, please go complain to somebody about the things that we struggle with, because you get perspective. And it's not a complaint. That's part of the process of working through things when you're managing it in a healthy way, right? You need to talk it out.
Yeah.
And he didn't have that, which it was very concerned. So when things reached a point, we'll call it the tipping point, but the series of things leading up to him dying, and the first thing he says to me on the heels of, I think I can't, I don't think I can, if I have this over here as my choice, I'd rather die. I remember and then he says, oh, by the way, swear to me you will not tell a soul what's going on. He's like, I can't have you going around and talking to people about this.
Yeah.
And to the point where now I'm in this position of anguish.
Yeah.
Of, this is very much an opera, like, and like, yes, there was intervention, and yes, there were a couple of weeks of negotiating and awfulness that we're going to have to unfortunately not have time for today. But like, when you're presented with what you know about a person, and you want them to feel respected and to have a shred of proof of dignity in a situation, and not add to the wobbliness.
Yeah.
It felt like an unovercomable circumstance to put on my shoulders the responsibility of respecting how he operates with what I knew very clearly to not be working for him.
Yeah. Which is why I think that shift of expanding what is a safe space for you and being willing to share with people.
It wasn't even just that. It was a belief that it wasn't okay.
No, totally. I get that. But that's the shift that needs to happen, right? Like, we got to get away from that. We got to change the way that we view that and look at in that image. And really, like, we talk about shame being one of those things that men.
Right.
Well, it's almost a little bit different. Like, when I look at, and I kind of hear this in what you're describing with Chris, and when I look at Tim, I see, like, some ego in there.
Yeah.
Like I cultivate, I'm making a crazy assertion here, right? Like this is, I have no idea if this is where he's at, but it is possible just by me knowing as much as I did, is it's possible that he couldn't deal with some of the blowback that was going to happen from a financial or success standpoint, whatever, right? That there were things that he was going to have to lose or give up that he was never going to be able to handle that. Like that, that I don't know. And again, complete speculation on my part, so I have no idea. But I can kind of place myself in that moment and go, gosh, it is. I mean, it's certainly the shame, but it's like this person, like, if I've done all this, I can't go backwards. If I've done all this,
Yeah.
I can't show that I've done, like, this isn't like,
And you know what?
I can't
I
leave
think
that.
that is it also is compounded by this notion that all of this that you build in your life was to prove that you could overcome the stuff that you just weren't able to go
Yeah.
heal and clean up.
Right.
And I don't say just lightly,
Yeah.
but the point being, all of the weight that you put on that success is so attached to the belief system and the stuff that you're trying to put in a box and on a shelf to prove that you're over it or better or heal, or like, look, I'm fine. But the fact that you have so much responsibility and belief and programming tethered to uh, to what it means if you fail is evidence to me of that's where the heat, like, this is your work splayed.
Yep.
Because you do see but people have things, lose things, or go through relationships that work or don't, or school, you fail a class, or work, you don't get the job, or you lose the job, or you have a dream that you get so close you can taste it, only to stumble and then go all the way back to the beginning. And this notion of only going forward in life it is another lie we tell ourselves. But if that is tethered to, I have to achieve this so that I know that this box can stay on the shelf because it's behind me that way, or then I know that this isn't a real problem if I keep, I'll never have to deal with it as long as I don't make a mess of where I'm at.
Yeah.
That's the problem. Because that mess, that thing that we are like, you could have navigated the circumstance that you're trying to piece together about the tipping point. A person will go through, of course, the whole spectrum, the gamut of feelings about how that is, but a person that's not putting their entire life's mission and value and worth on a pass or fail for that moment doesn't. They see options.
Yeah.
They see options, and a person who has everything riding on it is exactly like that. Was, you talk about a tipping point, a mistake is made, and suddenly everything he'd worked for to become someone other than his father looked him in the mirror and gave him a glimpse of, like, maybe there's stuff to work on here. And also it's going to cost you a lot of the things that you have held on to so tightly, because this mistake is going, there's some damage here.
Going back to,
but it's like
him saying, if this is my choice, I'd rather not.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And that's the thing, because he couldn't imagine, he was like, I'm losing it all. I'm losing it all. And I saw, and there's a way to navigate to rebuild a healthy version so that you become a beacon of hope to other people, especially men who see an incredibly successful person on the outside that's struggling, that you finally say, fuck the shenanigans and take down the silos and let people see that there is a healthy path on the other side if you punch through this shit.
Well, and again, I think the only way for any human to get through that is to be in communication, right? Like, gotta be able to, like, you can do things, but you can't do it without being with other people and, relying on them to be a source for you, right?
Yeah.
And that's the thing. All right, let's do another card.
Okay. I feel like we're all over the place, but maybe we're not.
No, it's pretty good because I think that was a lot on them. This is going to be about us.
I really wish that I could read that.
That's why you don't show the card. What are the thoughts that we had? So,
you and I.
Yeah. What are the thoughts that we had when we?
Oh, it goes back.
Well, yeah, we're gonna do something with the box there. What are the thoughts that we had? I know for me, and I know that you probably went through so many, and let's stay away from the grief, just more of the thoughts today, right? Like, because grief is going to be present during the thoughts. So when I say thoughts, like the first thing that comes to mind is for me and for me with Tim is because it was COVID, I hadn't talked to him in like a year, maybe more. I mean, that's not true. I had a couple of conversations, but like nothing, like we hadn't done our normal walks that we would do from time to time. We hadn't done and been in the kind of communication. Our relationship was not the same relationship we had for the first decade that we were together. It had shifted over time, and so we were less close, but yet still there, right? Like it was still a relationship that was there. First thought for me that I could have made a difference. Why didn't I reach out to him? Why didn't I call? Why didn't I stay in touch? Why didn't I like all of those feelings of like, then the thoughts of like, I, you know, like there's almost responsibility there, like that I could have done something different. Like I don't know that he had people, and no diminishment of the people around him, but no people like me that could like get into that with him, right, and have some of the conversations that we've had in our past. And I just don't know. And it just, and so for me, that's the biggest thought.
Man, I had a million, and I think I still do. I think it's important for me to also say, like, the version of me that was navigating this through his final days with him was also a broken person, or in a broken place,
Yeah.
I should say. It wasn't like it was out of the blue.
Yep.
Although I know that if someone had told me 3 weeks prior to it occurring that that was going to happen in 3 weeks, I would have said, "Are you fucking kidding me?
No,
You not
no,
know
no
this?
chance.
No
right.
chance."
Yeah, no chance.
So not out of the blue in the aspect of the series of things leading
Right.
up to it.
So what
But
is like, because knowing that you've got a million of
but there
thoughts,
are a
right?
million.
But
I
like,
think
what were the ones at the top? Like, what was one or two that were like really that was a struggle, or that were painful for you, or that was like just the toughest?
I mean the first was just that all of the words that come with the "you got to be fucking kidding me."
Mm-hmm.
He was a very decisive person, and there was already, like I said, an attempt at intervention to ruin his first plan.
Mm-hmm.
I also knew the second that I got the call that he hadn't come to work, in my gut, in my heart, I knew exactly what I was going to be told. And my first thought was, I believed it. I knew simultaneously there was no changing this very decisive man's mind. And I knew a million things I wish I would have said at the same time.
Mm.
But I knew better than to undermine the dignity of his last decision than to think that I was capable of stopping
Yeah.
him. And I know that those words strung together probably sound incredibly naive, but I say it with conviction.
No.
And Chris's circumstance, because he knew that I was building an army of people to try and look out for him, his strategy was to, when he decided, first plan didn't work, going to show the world, going to participate as though I'm doing the things I'm supposed to be doing, including therapy sessions 3 times a week for 2 hours a day, participating, running the right errands, being Chris.
Yeah.
Right? Putting like indicators out there that no, this is what a man does when he's choosing to live.
Yeah. Yeah.
Until he died. For 2 weeks, he was doing it. Was normal office hours. He even picked up his fucking skis at Stu events that he had just had custom made the day before, right? And I'm seeing these things across our bank account, and I'm like, oh, okay, it looks like he's making plans for this winter, right?
Great.
Like
Yeah.
indicators, clue, and he was brilliantly misleading. And so those were my thoughts. Was, oh, you fucking got me. You helped me, like, and he knows I love solving mysteries and strategy, and like this dance we were playing,
Yeah.
and it's not to make light of it, but to kind of make light, like it was a dance. It was a strategic, like we both loved the like a lot of like not just the mystery, but the how many angles can you look at something, right? And I knew I would be in that dance with him. And so, but he fucking bested it. And I don't say that from a place of ego. I say that from a place of, you asked me, the most genuine first thought was that motherfucker.
Yeah. He got you.
He got everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. You said something when you started off about honoring that, you know,
The dignity of his last choice.
The date of that last choice. You know, when I shared the thought that I shared around Tim, like that was the thought that was going through my head. Like, oh, my fault. I could have made a difference. Like, I could have said something. I could have been there for him. His son was so great, and when I shared that with him, just it is flat out. Everybody's having those kind of thoughts and those feelings out there, that things, but
The
that
forensics
wasn't
we
the
do.
things,
Yeah.
right?
The
Yeah,
forensics we do, and
yeah,
everybody who knows somebody or loved somebody or lost somebody or has thought of it themselves, the forensics we do, especially like my anxious analytical mind too, like, and also from a place of, did I tip him over? Did I use tough love wrong? Did I could I have just said what he wanted to hear? Or and I'm sure other people, actually I know for a fact some people have well-meaning, not until it comes out of their mouth do I think they understand
right.
what they're saying to me, but like,
Yeah.
well, did you try this? And it's like,
Even if I had, does it matter right
I
now?
gotta
Yeah,
tell
yeah, yeah,
you,
yeah,
like, I'm good enough at punishing myself. The forensics are mind numbing, and it took me a lot to get to a place of not doing that. And I still, once in a while, I'm just like, Jesus, why did, and then I have to remind myself, he's still dead. He's still dead, and the forensics don't bring him back. And if they aren't serving my grief and healing and the ability to pull back together a place of having a healthier relationship of the story with forgiveness and with grace and with a greater perspective and a greater empathy and a greater relationship with the woman in the mirror,
yeah.
then I'm hurting the person that he loved. And one of the last things he asked me to do was to take care of the person he loved so much more than he could.
That's the truth, right? Like, and I'm sure we'll talk about this when we talk about grieving and some other things down the road. But that is the last thing that he would have wanted for you, right?
He
Is
genuinely, whether I agree with his choice or not, he genuinely felt he was unburdening our relationship
yeah.
along with himself.
That's an interesting perspective, because I could.
It was wrong, and I disagree with it.
Yeah, yeah. I can place. I could place Tim in that same thing. Like, I'm unburdening partners, family members. I'm doing this as a service, not as some other reason. Right?
Yeah.
Like, that could be the case, and it's.
And if that is their truth, let them die with that as their truth. In spite of what we know could have been different,
Yeah.
how much we would have wanted to change the brokenness of that programming, all of that you can debate all day long. At the end of the day, it doesn't serve good to say they didn't mean it, or even Chris months before he died called it a cowardly thing, and yet I think it took him, not to put a freaking hero status on it whatsoever, but like, to honor the amount of pain that it takes to bring a person to the choice in the very last minute to be committed to that. Like, I freeze trying to like go down a steep hill skiing.
Yeah.
My legs shake sometimes. I can't fathom.
Yeah.
And so it's like, you have to honor the thing that they, just because they didn't understand or we see it differently on this side, does not allow us that we don't get to change their minds for them.
Yeah.
In their death.
It's so hard, because it's so hard to not look at it like it's a super selfish act, right? Like, because you look at it and you're going, wow, look at
But it's
the devastation of just heartache.
But isn't that coming from a selfish place for you?
No,
because you're saying the person I love, you took them away from me.
Totally get it.
Right?
I totally get it. And like, I can see, and I'm with you. I can totally see that perspective of, they're literally, and we're talking about our cases, right?
Yeah.
And we get that there's all sorts of different circumstances out there, but I can totally see that being some reasoning in there. You'll be better off by me making this choice, and I've got a million reasons why. Da 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 da. Like, it's again, that's where I think we got to keep coming back to the barrier. There's two barriers to break, and the one is being able to communicate, right?
Mm-hmm.
Being able to get people to express themselves, because if they can't see other options. They're only going to see it through their point of view, and if they can't look at it through another point of view, they're stuck. That's the first thing. The second thing is, the other thing that you're out to change the world in is asking for help.
The everyday shit.
Right. But
Not the wait till it's bad shit.
yeah, us guys, we don't like asking for help,
Nobody does.
right? Yep. But I'm gonna say that it's 4 or 5 times harder for guys, like in the same realm, right? Like
Do you like being asked for help?
I
Hey
do.
Gary, I
I,
could use your advice on something.
I do. I love it.
If I call you, hey Gary, I could use your advice on something.
Yeah.
How do you feel when you're tapped in for that?
I love it.
Do you almost feel like
I get to.
chosen?
I feel yes. I feel special. I feel like I get to contribute. I feel like I get to do all of those things.
Yeah.
And I think that's a pretty human response to that.
Yeah. But so you think if you were to call me and say, Jenny, I could use your advice with something.
Yeah, but then I'd be weak. I'm not saying that that's what I would do now.
Right.
Right. But I'm telling you, 15 years ago, I would have.
Yeah.
I would have never have called.
What changed
I would
your
never
mind?
have called Jenny and said, "Hey, you know what? Really struggling on my productivity today. What can we do? Well, let's start. Jenny says, let's start having morning check-in calls. Great.
That is what happened.
I know. It's exactly what happened, right?
Yeah.
And so, like, now we're partners that way. Okay, great. We put our word to what we're accomplishing every day. Great. I never would have done that before.
So what changed?
I started communicating. I got over
What got
not
you there?
being able to sharing. A lot of work, a lot of professional, personal development work. Right. So that was my path towards that. Like, how do I get more out of life? How do I make this juicy thing called life more? Yeah. Right. How do I get it? And that's been the number one thing. Right. Well, has been to like actually share yourself, to actually communicate, be with other people. And that's what makes it easy. So that's what's changed.
Well, and that's right? Like the concept to me. The other thing, I mean, I've dealt with a lot of scenarios in life where I've relied on my village, right? Like when I've talked about this, when I look back at everything I've ever dealt with, what stands out the most, hands down, is not the circumstance, but rather the response and the support that I got from my network, my tribe, my people, and you name it, scenario. We've got all sorts of boxes to unpack just here, right? But like the point being, the trick of it wasn't that I always knew what I needed to ask for.
Right.
And I think that that's another like misnomer about asking for help, right? It's like sometimes all I had to do, and this is where the feminine, I think, like naturally we just start talking. It's because we don't always know what we need. But when you give people the visibility to take a look at what you're dealing with, things pop up that you might not have otherwise thought about. And whether you come up with those answers by yourself or just by virtue of like sharing about what you're dealing with, and the suggestions start kind of like coming, or the hand, like even without saying, Gary, will you help me with this thing? If I just was like, if we were all hanging out and you're asking what I'm up to, and I actually share the real stuff and not the social media approved perfect version of how everything's going so great. As a founder, I'm fine. I swear. I shower every day. like if I was like but to let people have a little visibility to our struggle, I'd be like, here's what I got going on. Like, have you dealt with, people love to give free advice. Right. And it doesn't mean it's all great advice, but the fact that you can put it out there and shed some light on it gives other people an opportunity to come in to the table with you.
Yeah. Just for you and for others, I like to look at advice as not advice, but as another point of view.
Right. Sure.
And that's what opens up.
Sure.
That's what allows you to open up that other perspective.
Right? You can take it or leave it. But what's born out of that is like, I mean, my favorite moment of this being like so acute was when one of my really good inner circle, Kristen, shout out. Like I'm in a freaking mess putty pile just days after all of this starts. Like it just is. There's the before Chris and after Chris death, right? So we got BC and AC.
Yeah.
Like so we're like T minus 2 or 3 days or in afterwards. Sorry, and this notion of mom, hey, let's go shopping for that funeral dress. Just like, Martha, I don't want a dress hanging in my closet with my next to my wedding dress of like this is what I wore at the funeral. Like I couldn't get over it, and I'm like, but I'm literally in our closet. He had the most beautiful freaking pinstripe Mario suits, like you name it. He was a Wall Street man, and like his cologne and his pins and his essence was in all of them, right? And so I just was like buried in this closet, just like wrapped in wrapped in him, right? I needed to smell him, I needed to feel him, I needed to be with him. My girlfriend beautifully comes to check. Oh, I see. How are we doing? You know, I was like, it's what it looks like.
Uh-huh.
And I'm like, please tell my mom not to like make me go shopping. And she's looking around. She's like, you have plenty of dresses in here. And she grabs my wedding dress. And I'm like, what am I gonna wear my fucking wedding dress? Like the humor,
Yeah,
right? The dark widow jokes had the sarcasm because they cross your mind. They have to come out, right?
Yeah.
Like I'm not wearing my fucking wedding. Maybe I'll wear my wedding dress. Like that sounds like a great idea. Just to really fly in the face of fuckery.
Yeah.
And she's like, no, but I had it designed in Seattle for our wedding, obviously. And she's like, well, but maybe they could help you with something. And I'm like, not following. And I'm just sitting there and she's looking at me and realizing I'm going to put it together. And I'm just like, the suits. Yes, the suits. Like I was laying in my answer. I wasn't, and it came across as a complaint and defiance about this task. But meanwhile, she's looking. I'm asking for help.
Yeah, and
I'm screaming for it. And so she's like, I'll dial them up. I'll see if they can get you in. We're talking a week and a half turnaround, and they tore up a couple of his suits, and they created a masterpiece, a romper for me, and a beautiful dress out of his one of his jackets for my daughter. And to this day, they feel like power suits. They feel like love. They feel like hugs. They don't feel like a thing I don't want to touch. They feel like the thing that I'm like, today Chris gets to come with us to things. And when they gave it to presented it to me, they had leftover fabric for my wedding dress, and they had put a little heart out of the fabric on the inside, and it just could have never. But here I like it was the light bulb of I'm sitting in my problem, and I just needed to tell someone what I was dealing with. I just needed someone to
say
see
it to somebody because somebody else can see it. Like I love that. I love that story. By the way, it's the first time I heard it. And you've got me. Yeah, I don't think you shared that one with me.
Oh wow.
Maybe.
Okay. I don't know if I've even worn the suit around you, but
I don't think you have.
It's for launch day.
That's pretty good. Ooh, great. Awesome. Well, before we finish things up, I want us both say the top 3 things that we loved or just really appreciated about our person.
That's an impossible question.
Just the top 3.
Why I'm thinking, please go.
Yeah. So when I first met Tim, it was kind of like I had met the entire rest of the family, and he was away at Wazoo, and so a month or 2 or 3 before I'd ever gotten to meet him, and so he was already this kind of mythological, like he already had this leadership presence within his family that I just didn't understand, didn't get it. And when he came, like when I first met him, it was like almost instantly best friends, like just like that. It was just so quick, and we would go for walks and talk business and strategy, and like we're young, we're neither of us have owned a business yet, neither of us have like done anything big yet, like we're just talking like in it
dreaming.
Yeah, just man, and I love that, and that never changed all the way through. Like his vision, I loved it, like, and it was such a huge impact on me and how I go about doing my work now, and I just love it, right? Like, so that was number 1. Number 2 would be how he was the squeak. He literally had a nickname called Squeaky. He's the squeakiest millionaire you've ever met, right?
Squeakiest?
Meaning that he used coupons for everything. Like,
I don't know if I'd call that squeaky, like, but that's
squeaky.
Fun.
He was squeaky. We called him Squeaky just because he was just so tight, like right, like so tight, like wouldn't. But that's not the part I loved. The part I loved was he was so giving. Like he took the family
on trips.
The
contrast of it.
He took. I mean, like I got so many trips, like cruise. Got to go to a Super Bowl. Got to go do these things, and not just me. Like it would be 10 of us, 12 of us, right? Like it'd be a big group of us, and it was people. just really, really great. And then last but not least on those 3 would be he had a soft spot in his heart for he had we had 2 people that were within that group in particular with substance abuse problems. One of them killed themselves, but he always took care of them. Like they got to live with him. They got to do the things right. He always made sure that they had a place to play, place to be, right, and a purpose.
Like almost related.
Yeah, yeah, and so yeah, those are the three things for me.
Sounds like a really cool guy.
He was, and like all of us, flawed. Like I could give you the top three things I didn't like.
Yeah.
Right.
No,
Like
let's be
it'd
clear.
it'd
These
the,
guys don't get
yeah,
halos just because they're
yeah,
dead.
no, totally, right. Yeah, I mean, I could do that list, but that's not it, right?
Yeah.
Like
It wasn't, that was never how you needed to see them. Like,
Yep.
You didn't need to see perfect.
Nope.
Oh man. Thank you for sharing that. I'm just picturing him now.
Yeah.
I left his name in the temple.
Thank you.
I don't know how you come up with three with this person. I'm gonna do my best. I think like okay, so this man was a storyteller and an adventurer. So I would say there's an adventure for every story and a story for every adventure. And to ride with this man in life meant nothing is ever as it seems, but just get ready because it's gonna be way more awesome. Not always in a positive awesome, but like in a you might be scared half
yeah,
the time.
yeah,
Like
experiential.
like he sent me on some of the scariest possible fucking adventures in my life. Like and it was always like, you'll be fine. You'll be fine. And this whole like you'll be fine mantra. It'll be fine, you'll be fine. He would say it not dismissively. It felt dismissive sometimes.
Yeah.
Where I especially on the side of the ledge of a mountain when I'm scared of heights and he's having me backpack with 30 pounds on my back for my first hike and it's an experts only warning.
Yeah.
Like he'd be like, "You got this, babe. You'll be fine. I knew you could do it." But and I felt like part of me was like, "Oh, it's so dismissive." What I learned is the amount of confidence that he had in me as a woman was the greatest expression of love and compliment from him because his degree of confidence in other humans was not just handed out.
I see how this is going already. Do you see how she worked out two into one? Like it was the adventure part of Chris, the experiential,
storytelling,
and then also the how he
how big his freaking heart was.
Yeah, yeah.
His heart was huge. So, but the thing about his stories too,
yeah,
which you'll appreciate, maybe it's kind of contagious. This he could tell a very like he would have people on the edge of their seats, sometimes wondering when he was going to finish the story.
What?
But then he'd get into a really good one, and he'd pause to think, and you'd be like he could do it around groups of people, where people are just still like, and then he's like, "Oh, you were about to say something," and he'll tease someone up to keep going. He could make one story last start to finish 3 years. Yeah. We'd be back around the same group of people 6 months later, and
then he'd keep continuing.
The group would be there. The time would be just right. He wouldn't. So he would just wait. He would just sort it, and the maybe the enough like percentage of the same people from the 6 months ago story would be there. And I'll never forget when I figured out this was his thing. We're sitting around a fire, and he sits back. He gets this grin. I'm like, "What's up?" And he goes, "So anyway, back to blah blah blah," and he picks up right where he left off.
That's so great.
And we're just like, "Are you fucking kidding me right now?" But then it's like, "All right, we're gonna hear it." No, that story, like, he'd still masterfully get someone to like, he'd get to the pot, he'd bring someone in, he'd blah, blah, blah. Oh, next time, and then like he must have had a dozen different stories that I was having to track around all these different groups of people. These. There's awesome. A story, but he loved telling stories, and he just loved the way to bring people in. He was a freaking master at it.
All right, so that's one.
Well, the adventure was two.
All right,
adventures and stories.
All right.
I don't even know. Like,
don't worry, you're gonna probably work 2 or 3 of them in there. So pick one.
Now I know what you're gonna say when I die. I think his curiosity. He was never satisfied with the answer to a question. He was satisfied with the next question. He could build off of it. To a point where it drove me fucking bonkers sometimes too. It's like, come on, can we just make a decision? We're just picking something out, right? Why do you think they made it this way? I'm like, well, can we talk about it after we just buy a piece of furniture? Can we just, I don't know, like some stuff I'm just not that curious about. But
his curiosity though,
he loved. But when we would like the cosmos to me, one of my favorite topics, not just topics, but my favorite source of wonder and source of youth and source of therapy and source of curiosity and like the bigger questions. And sometimes the ability to simplify life when you look up, right? Like all the things, we would talk through a series of questions and just figure out not only how it wasn't even just how things work in this universe, but like those perspectives that you're talking about, and figure out the how do we even push our own boundaries on the way that we look at things and the way we feel we fit into things. And you learn so much about not just belief systems within somebody, but the way they think and see and experience the world. And man, it was so much fun to like
Mhm.
just you could go from dream state to contemplation to like, oh my god, I've got an even greater question. But that level of curiosity is something that I hope I can continue to not only like live it, sometimes I feel like I can hear his voice being like,
Yeah.
"Oh, but what about this?" And I'm like, "I don't think that was mine. I think he actually put that in my brain."
Yeah.
But then to be able to remember, like, we're not going to ever have. I don't think the goal is having all the answers.
Yeah.
It's how big can we make the possibilities and the
Right.
questions
Right.
and then to me that it just expands what love is for another human, another soul, another experience, and then also I'll never be bored. I'll never be bored.
Yeah.
And I hope that I can keep surrounding myself with people that not only enjoy that, but tolerate my unsatiated need to like
Right.
explore.
Yep.
Because I miss that the most about him.
Yeah.
I don't do small talk very well, Gary.
That's good.
That's something he
I know.
understood about me.
Yep. No, it is great though. I'll save my acknowledgement for the end. All right. We're gonna start wrapping this up. What are we gonna do with this box? Are we gonna put it on a shelf?
No.
Are we holding on to it?
I think
Are
we
we gonna
crack
give
it
it a
wide
new
open.
label? Kinda.
I think we keep it open. I think it needs to air out a little.
Yeah.
And I think we say like I think we bring it out into the light. We stop acting we start messing around with what it means to feel scared and wobbly and tinker with it because saying it's too hard is not nearly as hard as someone deciding to give up.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think what I would invite from both of us, like I won't stop talking about the importance of addressing this topic, not because I want to focus on death, but because I want people to understand the impact that happens and the redistribution of pain that happens when that choice is made.
Yeah.
We're all just asked to live with that burden.
Well, I like keeping that box open, airing it out. This will certainly not be the last time that we talk about suicide. Certainly will be something that put on there. And now I'll take my moment to acknowledge you and just say, like, it takes a really brave person to be able to openly and vulnerably share about your life and your experiences there. And thankful and grateful that you do that, not just with me, but with many others that you meet. And
Gary,
purpose
stop.
to what is going on.
I'm sitting on my hands, so I don't use the microphone. I'll tip over and everything else.
And that leads into what I think we should do with the box by keeping it open is we got to keep on having these conversations. We got to normalize that people can talk about what's bugging them. We can talk about depression. We can talk about anxiety. We can talk about
humanness.
We can talk about suicide.
We can talk about
we
humanness.
can talk about being human. Yeah. And so, yeah, definitely keeping that box open. Let's not put that on a shelf. Let's keep it present for other people to deal with and talk about.
And then also like making some commitments. Like my commitments are right up here on my whiteboard that you can't see.
Yeah.
But the first line of it is the one that matters the most, and it's I'm gonna love that person. I'm gonna screw it up now. I'm gonna love that person in the mirror like my life depends on it. And that is something I promise myself every day. It is a choice.
Yeah. And break.